In recent weeks, there has been much talk about NATO countries training Ukrainian pilots to operate F-16 fighter jets, a subject that was at one time ruled out by the West and deemed too aggressive towards Russia, now becoming a reality. Many news pundits and analysts have claimed this is to give Ukraine a greater technological edge over its numerically superior Russian adversaries in the air, and while it is true F-16s would help Ukraine to confront the Russians in open aerial combat, we can see there is another reason. The Ukrainian Air Force has defied expectations. Where it was once feared whether it would survive the first day of the Russian invasion, over a year later it is still in the fight. However, without F-16s, the time to bow out of that fight may just be around the corner. Welcome to the Warriors Tales channel, and today we will be assessing the actual losses of the Ukrainian Air Force during its war with Russia and what that means for the nature of its future operations. We will start with the obvious, which is how many aircraft Ukraine began the war with. In regards to fighters, on paper, Ukraine had 29 Sukhoi 27 fighters and at least 45 MiG-29 airframes, possibly even 70. However, a large number of the MiG-29 fleet was either partially or completely unserviceable due to neglect and lack of funds from Ukraine's government prior to the Maidan Revolution of 2014. After 2014, getting parts from Russia for the MiG-29s was near impossible, and most of the Ukrainian MiG-29s that had been stationed in Crimea were not functional when Russia returned them to Ukraine. The Sukhoi 27s were in better condition, though 6 were trainer aircraft and not fully suited for combat. Thus, at the outbreak of war on February 24, 2022, Ukraine was believed to have a total of 23 Sukhoi 27s and 29 MiG-29s in service and ready for combat. This gave a total of 52 active fighter aircraft, with anything between 22 and 47 additional airframes. As for strike and ground attack aircraft, Ukraine had a small fleet of Sukhoi 24 Fencers and Sukhoi 25 Frogfoots. In total, it had 18 Sukhoi 24Ms and 2 Sukhoi 24MR reconnaissance aircraft, though due to shortage of parts after 2014, only 12 of the Sukhoi 24Ms were still serviceable in an operational capacity come the invasion, and even the 2 reconnaissance variants were taken out of service to prevent overuse. As many as 32 Sukhoi 25 airframes belonged to the Ukrainian Air Force in early 2022, but they had been used the most and suffered the highest casualties to Russian surface-to-air missiles in the Donbass war, so those not serviceable may have been scavenged for parts. What is certain is Ukraine had 20 in service, meaning combined with the Sukhoi 24, it possessed 32 aircraft for interdiction and close air support missions when the war began, with anything from 8 to 20 additional inoperable airframes. In all, this gave Ukraine 84 combat aircraft and 30 to 67 additional airframes, or 114 to 151 aircraft in total. Now, while the Ukrainian Air Force fought with great courage and defied all expectations in what is most likely the toughest air war seen in half a century, it had still suffered notable losses in the first month. By March 23, 2022, Ukraine had lost 36 combat aircraft, of which we know at least several were inoperable airframes. Now, while an outstanding feat to keep losses so low against the second biggest air force in the world, even if we detract these from its total number of planes at the start of the war, this is still a loss rate of between 20 and 25%, meaning if it continued the way it did, the Ukrainian Air Force would be destroyed by no later than September 2022. Though I will not go into details about how it changed the nature of its operations, though I will happily make a video if requested, Ukraine started to use its Air Force in what can be broadly described as airborne guerrilla warfare to remain combat effective. The MiG-29s and Sukhoi 27s were refitted with US-made HARM anti-radiation missiles to erode enemy air defences and give some level of standoff capability against the Russians, while the strike aircraft made airstrikes only when opportunities presented themselves or if there was simply no other choice to hold the front line. This worked during the summer of 2022, the Ukrainian Air Force doing just enough to support the Ukrainian offensives in Kherson, Kharkiv and even Snake Island, while keeping the Russian Air Force away to an acceptable level. alongside Ukrainian SAM batteries. Their own losses while doing all of this were reduced and allowed them to remain combat effective. However, with the start of the Russian drone and missile campaign against Ukrainian infrastructure in late 2022, losses began to creep up again. At least one Sukhoi 27 and two MiG-29s were lost due to debris from destroyed drones while intercepting them, and with a new hypersonic air-to-air missile in service, the Russians were able to hunt the Ukrainian aircraft far better, especially as they now knew the drone raids would bring up the fighters. During the later months of the Battle of Bakhmut, there was also a notable absence of Ukrainian air support, as clearly the risk was just too great to the remaining ground attack aircraft, despite the situation. In total, by the end of May 2023, Ukraine is visually confirmed to have lost the following number of aircraft, according to Oryx, of which all were serviceable: 17 MiG-29s, 12 Sukhoi 27s, 16 Sukhoi 25s, and 16 Sukhoi 24Ms, not to mention one reconnaissance variant. This gives us a total of 62 aircraft lost of the original 84 after 15 months of combat operations. If we go with Wikipedia's number of reported losses, which includes non-operational aircraft, this increases to 84, with several more damaged. This would make the Ukrainian Air Force effectively destroyed at this stage, which I can also confirm is not true. The first can be found in the fact that 17 Sukhoi 24Ms have been lost, including a recon variant, compared to the original 12 that started the war, which proves the Ukrainians have been able to get some of their non-operational aircraft working again, especially as the recent Storm Shadow missile strike on an ammo dump in Luhansk was confirmed to have been carried out by the last Sukhoi 24 MR. Another is that Ukraine has received replacement aircraft from NATO, which are as follows: 24 MiG-29s from Poland and Slovakia, plus 3 Slovak MiG-29s for use as spare parts, 4 Sukhoi 25s from North Macedonia for use as spare parts, and potentially 14 airworthy Sukhoi 25s from Bulgaria. The United States may also have given a few MiG-29s it purchased from the ex-East German Air Force in 1990, but allegedly then scrapped them and sold them to private collectors after evaluating them. But this number is likely negligible either way. Though this donation from NATO has replaced virtually all the MiG-29 casualties suffered by Ukraine and may have allowed them to potentially get a few more of their own airframes back in service, reducing casualties by as much as a third, there are still two long-term problems. The first is NATO has now essentially emptied its supply of Soviet-era fighter aircraft, and while fighter casualties are sustainable, if Bulgaria did not give any Sukhoi 25s, then Ukraine virtually has no strike aircraft left. Also, sooner or later, Ukraine's fighter fleet will suffer a similar fate, especially if Ukraine is to make a major offensive push this summer. It will need air support. Ukraine's frontline SAM batteries have in a practical sense spent their entire stockpile, and thus there would be little to deter the Russian Air Force from attacking a Ukrainian breach of their lines. The Ukrainian fighters would need to be called in to compensate, and for all their skill and bravery, their avionics, radars and missiles are inferior to those used by Russian fighters. With just 40 aircraft, they would be surely destroyed in an open battle with the Russians, no matter how defiantly they fought, especially as the Russians have superior numbers as well as technology. This isn't even taking into account Russia's array of long and medium range SAMs, which alone are a deadly enemy. Even if they could do this, with the loss of their frogfoots and fencers, the Ukrainian fighters could not subsidize the role of striking ground targets. The Sukhoi 27 and MiG-29 are not multi-role aircraft. Though they have been successfully integrated with Western HARM missiles, these are only useful against enemy radars and to some extent static targets. With regards to providing an airstrike on the battlefield, they would need to fly low and drop free-fall bombs World War II style, and the MiG-29 could not carry much. Thus, they would be very ineffective and again suffer high casualties even if the Russian Air Force was discounted. Thus, without a ground attack capability and their air superiority fighters destined to run out sooner or later, the solution becomes obvious. give Ukraine the F-16. The F-16 is a genuine multi-role fighter. Its avionics, radar, and the missiles available to it are superior to those of the Ukrainian MiG-29s and Sukhoi 27s, and would be a much closer match to the Russian Sukhoi 30s and Sukhoi 35s at standoff ranges. Also, it can do airstrikes with guided munitions, thus could fulfill the role of providing air cover and air support for the Ukrainian ground forces. If we look at the countries that are willing to provide F-16s to Ukraine under the new initiative, the obvious choice is Denmark and Holland, as they are transitioning to the F-35, and this gives us a total of 57 aircraft between the two air forces. And if we add up the original number of active Ukrainian strike aircraft at the start of the war, then also add 12 lost Sukhoi 27s, plus assuming a similar number of aircraft will be lost in the 4 months it will take to train the new crews. Would you look at that? Therefore, we can determine, much like the transfer of NATO tanks to Ukraine in early 2023, F-16s will be going to Ukraine not only to improve Ukraine's combat ability in the air, but to keep it in combat, full stop. Thank you all for watching this episode of Warriors Tales. If you'd like to see a similar analysis of Russian and Ukrainian tank losses, please check out my other video in the description. Thanks all for watching. All the best.